Hey everybody. So today we're going to look at some verses in 1 Samuel chapter 8, 5b through 17. We're going to see a worldly leadership model there. God's people desire this leadership model. Also how it looks in the church, how it brings some factionalism, an easy biblical solution to that, what it is. So let's do it. I'm going to try to not make it too choppy. Our first verse is 1 Samuel 8, 5b through 17. So Israel's talking to Samuel at this point. Samuel's sons were put in leadership and they basically failed. They did the same thing as Eli's sons to a degree, from what I'm gathering here. And Samuel was faithful. And anyways, Israel's talking to Samuel, and they say, you're old and your sons don't follow your example, so appoint a king to judge over us the same manner as all the other nations have. So this is Gentile king. This is like the Philistines, these other people that they're warring with. Verse 6, when they said, give us a king to judge us, Samuel considered their demand sinful, so he prayed to the Lord. But the Lord told him, listen to the people and everything they say to you. They have not rejected you, they have rejected me as their king. I think it's interesting that God kind of comforts Samuel in that. They are doing the same thing to you that they have done to me since the day I brought them out of Egypt until this day, abandoning me and worshiping other gods. So it's very interesting that this equates worshiping other gods to desiring this Gentile king or this man as their leader instead of God himself. Listen to them, but you must solemnly warn them and all them about the rights of the king who will rule over them. Samuel told all the Lord's words to the people who were asking for a king, and he said, these are the rights of the king who will rule over you. He will take your sons and put them to use in his chariots, on his horses, or running in front of his chariots. He can appoint them for his use of commanders, of thousands of commanders and of 50s, to plow his ground, or reap his harvest, or to make his weapons of war, or for the equipment of his chariots. He can take your daughters to become perfumers and cooks and bakers. He can take your fields, vineyards, and olive orchards and give them to his servants. He can take a tenth of your grain in your vineyards and give them to his officials and servants. He can take your male servants, female servants, your best young men, your donkeys, and use them for his work. He can take a tenth of your flocks, and you yourselves can or will become his servants. When that day comes, you will cry out because of the king you have chosen for yourselves. That's what the Lord won't answer you. That's a promise to that time. But there are quite a few parallels here. First, I want to examine this little bit of verse we just read. The beginning issue is that they looked to Samuel for their leader and not to God. They wanted a man to lead them. It's much easier for us to desire that which we can see to lead us and guide us instead of moving by faith in God. It's the biggest thing. So when Samuel's sons failed, they wanted a king like the Gentiles. So I think it's just so interesting how much this parallels with the church. But we'll just look at this. Samuel delivered them the model that God warned them, and they liked it. They said, ooh, that sounds pretty good. I mean, it seems like to me they didn't turn from it. They said, okay, he's gonna take our sons and make them his warriors, all this other stuff. He's going to take our daughters and they can be perfumers. He'll take a tenth of our grain and even we'll become his servants. So it's wonderful. This is what all these other kingdoms have. And then this king will go before them in a war. What I think is interesting is one point it says, your sons will fight for him in front of his chariots. So a good king, as I see in these movies and stuff, and a good leader goes before. I mean, God says God goes before us into the battle. These I can think about movies like Braveheart. I don't know how historically accurate they are, but these honorable kings would charge first in the battle. Right here it says that your sons will charge first in the battle. They'll be in front of his chariots. They'll be on the front lines for him. So he'll take your sons and make them his servants dishonorably to go out to these places. That's a little bit aside. Take your daughters, and they'll also become his servants. They'll make things for him and make his perfume. Also, he'll take a tenth of all and give it to your servants. To his servants, I'm sorry. And finally, you will become his servant. So I don't know if you guys are seeing this. It's a really basic model for world governments. We give you this protection, and you give us your tax money, and then whoever works for us, we pay you with this tax money. That's just how it works. Another big thing in this model is it presents a type of factionalism, and we see it really easy because there's two parties in the U.S. There's the Democrats and the Republicans, and so there's a lot of factionalism. It's this party, that party kind of mindset. So how does this model look in the church? How does it look in the church? A person goes out and they pick a ministry to serve or a pastor to serve. So a lot of people who are doing church shopping aren't necessarily seeking God, lead me, guide me, direct me. Where do you want me to go? But they're going and looking for these specific things that they want to see. Is the pastor a good speaker? Does he keep my attention well? How's he do on the pulpit on Sundays? What's the worship band like? What's the children's ministry look like? All this stuff. And I think all that should be taken into consideration. But the main point is that we should seek to serve God and where he wants us to be, whether we're suffering or whether we're just being lavish with luxury. All right. Second, after a period of time, you enter this ministry, your children will start to serve in these different, assuming they're gifted and able to be cherry picked. The kids will serve in the nurseries and the children's ministries. They'll serve in all these things, which is a good thing. Kids need to learn service, but at the same time, this parallels with this worldly model. The people are serving the pastor and the ministry, not everybody, and then their children begin to serve. Give a tenth to the ministry in order to pay the preacher, pay the buildings, pay all these other insurances and funds. I don't think the tithe is a bad thing, but I do believe that the tithe is an Old Testament principle. In the New Testament, it's more than that. If we have, and our brother or sister is in need, then we give to them. If we have to sell items in order to provide for our brother and sister's needs, then we sell them. And at the same time, well, how does a pastor get paid? Paul traveled around and he made tents. He made tents until I think it was maybe Timothy and Titus, I might be mistaken, but they came along, and then he was able to devote himself more to the teaching and preaching of the word, while these brothers helped him, to have his home and his food and everything he needed to have. So the tithe, I believe, is an Old Testament principle. It's no longer a tenth. It's different. It's more. We see a need. We address a need. I don't think tithing is bad. Again, so another parallel with the worldly model into the church, how it looks in the church, is the staff and the servants are paid from that tenth. The youth pastors, the children's pastor, the main pastor, all gets paid from this tenth. That tenth, and this is a really important thing. That tenth is used to build the brand. That the title is across the front of the building that pushes the brand of whatever it is. I don't want to name any because I don't want to slam anybody, but pushing that brand promotes this factionalism. It's not pushing Jesus. It's pushing that brand. In this worldly model, the people serve the pastor or the elder or whatever he calls himself or herself. instead of serving God. A lot of times, the man will even serve the model instead of serving God. The man who's in leadership will look to this model, and that's how we do it. And I think we've all been kind of tricked into it. I guess I don't know what the exact word is, but I was there. I thought that's what it was supposed to be. The leadership was supposed to look like that, like a business or some type of a worldly organization. But the kingdom is totally different. It's flipped upside down on its head, to where the leaders actually serve those who they lead and empower them and equip them. Don't tell them exactly what to do, but help them to seek and find God for themselves and go out and do that. Okay, so in the worldly model, man increases and Jesus decreases, instead of Jesus increasing and man decreasing. Let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 1 through 9. Okay, so Paul is writing to the Corinthians. He says, "Brothers, I was not able to speak to you as spiritual people, but as people of the flesh, as babies in Christ." Excuse me. He says, "I gave you milk to drink, not solid food, because you are not yet ready for it. In fact, you're still not ready, because you're still fleshly. For there is envy and strife among you. Are you not fleshly and living like unbelievers?" Envy and strife, living like unbelievers. Not being for one another, but being against one another, because one thing is better than the other. Whenever someone says, "I'm of Paul," and another, "I'm of Apollos," are you not unspiritual people? What then is Apollos, and what is Paul? They are servants through whom you believed, and each has the role the Lord has given him. I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. So neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but only God who gives the growth. Now the one planting and the one watering are one in purpose, and each will receive his own reward according to his own labor. For we are God's co-workers. You are God's field, God's building. So I want to point out that the fault here was not in the leaders. The fault here was in the people desiring to serve the man instead of serving the maker. It's the same idolatry that God has come against for so long, to serve creation instead of serving the creator. Okay, so there are times when the man is at fault. He likes that limelight. In the world model, the man gets the limelight and God decreases. So if we take that to a government, let's look at Trump and Pelosi. So this is just the worldly model, and it creates this factionism. They are here, it's this or this. And in the church, we enter into this factionalism in the government. We say, well, I'm going to be of this side, or I'm going to be of that side. Instead, I'm going to be for God. I'm going to do my best to uphold God's principles and do my duty to vote who I think is the best candidate. But ultimately, know that God is sovereign, God is in control, and we are serving God. 2, in the church, it brings up this type of mindset. It's this ministry or that ministry, this denomination or that denomination, this teacher or that teacher type of mindset. So what is the solution? It's a really simple one. I've been saying it the whole time. We are God's field and God's building. Jesus said, when he's talking to Peter, he says, "I will be building my church." Jesus says, "Go and make disciples." Serve God, don't serve the man. The man should be serving the people while serving God to equip and build. It's taking the worldly model and putting it on its head. It's totally different. It's pastors washing the feet of the people who he teaches to. I mean, could you imagine that? The pastor who would take on that worldly model and preach from the pulpit, and then the people he is discipling wash their feet and say, "You have to do this too." But instead, what we see is the people washing the pastor's feet, and that's upside down. That's upside down in the kingdom. So the duty of the fivefold ministry, as we call it, as people call it, the apostle, the prophet, the evangelist, the pastor, and teacher, is to equip the body to serve God, is to pour into these people and help them to achieve that connection with God, and still be there for counsel and talking about struggles and all these other things, these real deal things that are so hard in life. But we're not supposed to look at ourselves as leaders, but as brothers. There's something interesting in us that when we are speaking to somebody, let's say you're a leader, or you're gifted as a pastor or an evangelist, then there's this temptation in our mind to echo that title of leader, pastor, or evangelist when we're talking to somebody, instead of just saying, I'm a brother. We're on the same playing field here. I'm not above you. You're not above me. We're together in this, and we're working for the greater good of the kingdom. Anyways, hope you enjoy. I hope it's not too long, and I hope it's not too choppy. Love you guys.